There's an assumption most people carry without ever questioning it. Thinking happens in the brain. The body is just the vehicle. It carries the brain around, executes its instructions, and otherwise stays out of the way. What you think, how you feel, what decisions you make, all of that originates upstairs in the approximately 3 pounds of neural tissue between your ears. This assumption is wrong. Not partially wrong, not oversimplified or missing some nuance. Wrong in a way that changes the basic picture of what cognition actually is and where it happens. Over the past 3 decades, a field of research called embodied cognition has built a substantial and increasingly difficult to ignore body of evidence that thinking is not something the brain does alone. The body, its posture, its movements, its physical sensations, its interactions with the environment, is not just the container for thought. It is an active participant in producing it, and once you understand the mechanism, you start noticing it everywhere. The brain-body split that wasn't. The idea that mind and body are separate, that thinking is what happens in the brain while the body just follows orders, has deep roots in Western intellectual history. René Descartes formalized it in the 17th century, and it shaped centuries of philosophy, psychology, and eventually neuroscience. The brain was the seat of reason. The body was its instrument. What embodied cognition research has revealed, piece by piece, is that this separation was always a fiction. The brain and body are not two systems in a hierarchical relationship. They are one system, deeply integrated, continuously exchanging information and producing thought, perception, and decision-making through a process that cannot be cleanly located in either one alone. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio at the University of Southern California has spent decades documenting this integration. His work on patients with damage to the areas of the brain that process bodily signals found something striking. Without access to the body's ongoing emotional and physical signals, these patients could not make good decisions. Their reasoning was intact, their logic was fine, but they were unable to feel their way toward a choice, and the decisions they made were consistently poor. Damasio's conclusion was that emotion and bodily feeling are not noise that interferes with rational thinking. They are part of the computational process itself. The body's signals, its physiological states, its physical sensations, are inputs that the brain requires to think clearly. Remove them, and thinking degrades. How posture changes thought. The most direct evidence for embodied cognition comes from research on how physical states, particularly posture, influence cognitive and emotional states. In a series of studies by psychologist Amy Cuddy at Harvard and colleagues, subjects who held expansive, open postures, leaning back, taking up space, straightening the spine, showed measurable changes in hormonal levels, risk tolerance, and feelings of confidence compared to subjects who held contractive postures. The body was not expressing a mental state. It was producing one. Later, research complicated and partially challenged Cuddy's specific hormonal findings. The replication history here is contested. But the core finding that posture influences psychological state has survived across multiple independent replications and research groups. Research by Pablo Briñol at the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid found that subjects who wrote self-evaluations while sitting in upright versus slumped postures rated their own ideas as more credible and capable when upright. The same ideas, written by the same people, were evaluated differently, depending on whether the body generating them was physically open or closed. The posture was not reflecting confidence, it was partially constructing it. Gesture and the architecture of thought. The embodied cognition effect is not limited to posture. Gesture, the spontaneous hand movements people make while speaking, reveals something even more striking about the relationship between body and mind. Psychologist Susan Goldin-Meadow at the University of Chicago has spent decades studying gesture, and her findings challenge the assumption that gesture is just physical expression of thoughts that already exist in verbal form. What her research shows is that gesture and speech often carry different information, that the hands sometimes express ideas that the mouth has not yet articulated and sometimes cannot articulate. Gesture is not translating thought into movement. In many cases, gesture is part of the process by which thought becomes articulable at all. In studies of children learning mathematics, Goldin-Meadow found that children who gestured while solving problems learned more effectively than those who didn't, and that the gestures sometimes contained information about solution strategies the child had not yet verbalized. The hands were working out the problem alongside and sometimes ahead of the verbal reasoning system. This extends to adults. People asked to explain complex concepts gesture more when the concepts are difficult. When gesture is physically prevented, when people are asked to keep their hands still, verbal explanation becomes harder. The body is not illustrating thought, it is participating in producing it. The physical basis of abstract thought. Perhaps the most surprising finding in embodied cognition research is how deeply physical experience shapes abstract thinking, including concepts that seem to have nothing to do with the body at all. Research by Bargh at Yale and colleagues found that subjects who held warm cups of coffee while briefly meeting someone rated that person as having a warmer personality than subjects who held cold cups. Physical warmth, registered by the body, influenced the social judgment in a direction the subjects were entirely unaware of. In a separate line of research, subjects who had recently washed their hands judged moral dilemmas more leniently than those who hadn't, as if physical cleansing had carried over into moral evaluation. Subjects holding heavier clipboards judged job candidates as more serious and important than those holding lighter ones. Physical weight influenced the metaphorical sense of weightiness and importance. These are not small effects at the margins of perception. They are consistent influences on consequential judgments, produced by physical experiences that have no logical connection to the mental evaluations they are affecting. The brain, it appears, uses physical experience as a scaffold for abstract thought. Concepts like warmth, weight, cleanliness, and distance are not purely abstract. They are grounded in bodily experience, and the bodily experience continues to influence how the concepts function in cognition long after the immediate physical sensation has passed. What this means for how you think. The practical implications of embodied cognition research are wide and genuinely strange once you start paying attention. The physical environment you're in while thinking is not neutral. The posture you're holding is not just reflecting your mental state, it is partially producing it. The temperature of the room, the weight of the objects around you, the physical sensations in your body at any given moment are all inputs that the cognitive system is using below the level of conscious awareness to construct your thoughts, evaluations, and decisions. This does not mean the brain is not doing most of the work. It means the brain is doing that work with a continuous stream of bodily input that most cognitive science historically ignored, and that most people, in their daily experience, completely overlook. Researcher Lawrence Williams at the University of Colorado found that people asked to think about the future while walking forward were more optimistic about it than people thinking about the future while walking backward. The physical direction of movement was influencing the temporal orientation of thought. The body was not expressing a mental state, it was shaping one. Antonio Damasio, reflecting on decades of research into the brain-body relationship, has described the body as the mind's theater of operations, not the stage on which mental events are performed, but the environment within which they are generated. The mind, in this view, is not a thing that inhabits the body. It is a process that the body participates in producing, continuously, automatically, and largely without the conscious mind's awareness or consent. The thought you're having right now is not only happening in your brain, it is shaped by the position of your body, the physical sensations in your limbs, the temperature of the air around you, and dozens of other physical inputs that your cognitive system is processing and incorporating without telling you. This is not a reason to distrust your thinking. It is an invitation to notice something that was always true, that the mind and the body were never the separate things you were told they were. The thinking was always embodied, you just weren't told to look there. Mind translator, psychology translated clearly.